first of all, I was asked to do a talk on the Glasgow tradition. But in actual fact, as I've been going through the newspaper archives, the Dulcimer was actually known throughout the whole of Scotland and very popular, particularly in the 19th century. So the first part of the talk, I thought I would go through some of the newspaper archives just to give examples of the kind of place where you would been able to hear a dulcimer being played, or some of the people that were playing them. There's also a couple of wee stories in it that are maybe a sideline, but I thought they were interesting enough to include. So begin off, the first example that I found of a record of the dulcimer being mentioned in Scotland was in 1765 in Aberdeen. And you can see from this advert from the Aberdeen Journal, Joseph Ruddiman was making instruments in Aberdeen, one of which was dulcimer. And the advert underneath was David Geddes was teaching the same instruments, the guitar, violin, German flute, psaltery and dulcimer. And part of the significance for me in that is that it must have been a well enough known instrument. There was no need to explain what it was, and just to say that he was making them and that somebody was teaching them. Moving on from there, in 1787, this was obviously a bit of a novelty act, but Mr. Nicholson, who taught, among other things, 3 cats to play the strike several tunes on the dulcimer with their paws and to imitate the Italian manner of singing. He actually,
as good as me.
he actually taught loads of different animals to play different instruments and to do different tricks, different feats. But the reason I included that really was, just to give an example of something in the 1700s. There were quite a few mentions of the dulcimer at that period. Instruments for sale was the most common. Moving into the 19th century, it began to become more apparent in the newspapers. And this particular one, it's actually 2 dulcimer players from London who came up and played in Edinburgh. And they were so popular that some of the newspaper reviews say that people were queuing along the length of the street to get tickets to go in. So without actually going through the whole thing to tell you about it, it's the directors of Musard concerts who put on different types of musical events had brought the Messrs Nelson, and on the first night it was a private audience for people to approve how good they were. And they say the elder Nelson particularly was at once acknowledged to be a talented musician. His power over his instrument, the rapidity, and at the same time the accuracy of his execution exceeded anything we had ever heard. So it gives you an idea. They were impressed. The next one goes on. Now, the reason I've included this is it's unusual to find a description of an instrument at that period. And here was a description of their instruments. And the significant parts have highlighted on the belly and respectively parallel to the ends of the instrument there are fixed 2 rows of wooden pins. These are actually the bridges that they're talking about. If we go on to the next paragraph, it says the pins being beveled or brought to an edge at the top serve as bridges to elevate the supported strings. So that would suggest to me it's chessmen bridges. I don't know if everybody's familiar with chessmen bridges. I know they're most commonly used on the East Anglian dulcimers, but they were used. And this is a chessman bridge. I don't know if you can see that from an old Scottish dulcimer that I have. And you can see it's beveled at the top, and it has a small piece of brass embedded into it. So it gives us a good description of a 4-string instrument, 4 strings per course, and that is still the instruments that were being played in Glasgow in up to the 1970s, 1980s. They were very similar. Most of them had 3 or 4 strings per note. Very few of them, the ones in Glasgow, had chessmen bridges, but there were one. I have seen 1 or 2. And at the bottom of the page, he also describes the hammers. And again, this is really unusual to find a description of hammers at that period. Slight slips of cane about 6 inches long and carved at one end. The strings are struck with the carved end, which is muffled by a thread being twisted around it. And my first thought on that was, again, the East Anglian dulcimers. Any photographs I've seen of them, it's cane, but it's not carved at the end, it's wound the cane is wound in a loop. So that then made me think about some of the older Glasgow players that used cane. And the cane they used, it's more like a garden cane, where they carve out the handle and leave the end as a round piece. And this is one here, which I'll try and show you. This particular one has a piece of mandolin fretwire set in it to make it harder, but most of them didn't play like that. But and it has flexibility as well. So, to say, I thought it was quite important to have these descriptions because 100 years later, or 150 years later, they were still playing very much the same. The next part is equally as important because it gives us the programme of what they were playing, what kind of music they were playing. And then the first part of the programme, you can see the music that they're playing here. Miss Inverarity was the guest singer for the evening. But in the second part of their concert, they played some Scottish tunes as well. So I guess that would be to entertain the audience in Edinburgh. The Nelson brothers played to a full house for several months. They say that they were incredibly popular, and there are newspaper reviews, numerous newspaper reviews of these performances. But you know, towards the bottom, the author couldn't help but adding his own take on it. He wasn't a fan of the dulcimer. The tone of the dulcimer is much inferior to that of a modern piano, and is not unlike that of those tinkling instruments which are performed by itinerant foreigners in our streets, but the rapidity and precision with which the Messrs Nelson sweep over its chords excites the astonishment of all who hear them. The next few slides, I decided there was no point in showing every slide. I could have had hundreds of slides on it. So it's just to give an idea of the places you could hear it and how widespread it was over Scotland. So this is from Arbroath in 1855, Arbroath Total Abstinence Society. And the abstinence societies increased in popularity, temperance movements, and they seem to put on a lot of concerts with dulcimers in them because there are literally hundreds of reviews of them. This one tells us Mr. Gardner played. Another one here, back down to Paisley. And again, it's a different example. This time it's a works annual dinner for the staff, annual dance or concert. And we have a dulcimer playing there as well. The next one is a bit of a... I was hoping that I would be able to make some connection between Burns and the dulcimer. And I couldn't make any direct connection. This is the closest I got. The background story to it is that David Sellers was Burns's bosom buddy when they were in their youth, and they were drinking and womanising and the things that Burns is famous for. And David Sellers was his drinking buddy. He was also a good fiddle player, very good fiddle player by all accounts, and Burns praised his fiddle playing. But through several failed business ventures, he ended up in the debtors' jail in Irvine. But after he came out of the jail, he was a changed man. He decided he had to be a bit more sensible about things. And as luck would have it for him, his brother, who had a very successful business in India, died and left him a lot of money. So with his money, he started new businesses, he bought properties to make money from the rent and became respectable. And the author of this story wasn't too impressed by that, because he says, over whose fiddle all the vagabond tunes of his country had met in glorious harmony, became a town councillor of Irvine. Dainty Davy, the breaker of laws, the harum-scarum minstrel of the Rockings, transformed into a bailie. Oh, what a falling off was there! The worst was yet to be told. He who had sung the praises of water, now in the heyday of his prosperity, discarded the honest devil-may-care fiddle for the flimsy, egotistic, lisping dulcimer, utterly and miserably lost. So he wasn't a fan of the dulcimer either, was he? The next one takes us up to Aberdeen in 1889. And who wouldn't want to see the polyphonic instrumentalist and lightning manipulator, Mr. Hayward? And he had his party trick was playing with his eyes covered with a handkerchief. So up until that point, there are an increase in number, and towards the end, I'll show you some of the figures. But an increase in number appearing in the newspapers. The reviews of all these concerts been all over the place, really. Another one in 1890, this time from Shetland. But this is a bit of an anomaly here, but I've included it because it's the furthest north I could find a reference. But it tells about a school picnic, a Sunday school picnic. And after the picnic, they have games and sports. And the prizes consisted of money, dolls for the young bairns, ships for the boys, dulcimers, pincushions, knickknacks. So, I don't think that's dulcimers as we know them. I can only assume it's some kind of musical toy that they're referring to as the dulcimers. Still in the 1890s, Inverness, Banffshire, Tain, this one, a concert organised by Sir Charles and Lady Ross to raise funds for the Seaforth Boys Brigade. The significance in this one, apart from being so far north, was the fact that most of them up to now have been in working class environments. But this one, where the songs sung by the Countess of Cromarty met with a good reception, also did have performance on the dulcimer. So we have maybe a more of a parlour instrument than itinerant buskers. The next one, again in the 1890s, this one is the Banffshire Herald. And it's about a busker playing in Dingwall and how popular he was, how the crowds turned out to see him, and he made a lot of money from it. And also another one from a Dundee Advertiser, describing it as a dulcimer for sale, 3 octave, 4 strings to each note, tuned in G, fine powerful tone, beautiful inlaid, cost 48 shillings, 425 shillings. So again, as I've included this to show the range of where they were being found. We've now found it in Tain and Banff and Dundee and Glasgow and Paisley and Ayrshire. The next one, Airdrie Lodge number 1070 IOGT. I wondered about this at first, if this was going to be some a Masonic lodge or something, but IOGT is the International Order of Good Templars. So it's another temperance movement. Mr. William McNally, the champion dulcimer player. Now, William McNally was no doubt the most famous Scottish dulcimer player, sometimes billed as the Dulcimer King. In later years, he often spent the summer in Oban and played on the ferries serving the Western Isles. And about 2012, I was playing at a concert. It was a pensioners' Christmas night, actually. And I was playing with a fiddle group, and they asked me if I would take the dulcimer and play. And there was a woman approached me there, and she told me that her aunt and uncle lived in Oban, and she used to spend her summers there. And she said Mr. McNally used to come and stay with them because her uncle played the dulcimer as well, and the two of them would sit and play. And unfortunately, I never took a note of his name. But here we have it again up the west coast in Oban. It was well known there. Back to Dundee Courier. A high-class concert and variety entertainment was given in the Drill Hall in Blairathal. I found this one interesting because it's the first mention I've came across of not being solo dulcimer, because most of them it's all been, or all of them so far, it's been solo dulcimer. And this was the Waverley Trio with mandolin, dulcimer and piano. So it would be interesting to find out more about the Waverley Trio, but I haven't been able to find anything about that. Back up north, further north, up to Fraserburgh. Special engagement of Belasco, the celebrated London instrumentalist and champion dulcimer soloist, who has performed before King Edward VII and challenges the world as a dulcimer soloist. I don't quite know what challenging the world is, but it must have been quite a sight and quite a performance. Back down again to Motherwell, and this is again another bit, maybe a wee bit offbeat story, but it's a story about the town hall, Motherwell Town Hall, and the lesser hall was being hired for a dance, and it transpired that the people hiring it wanted to have a melodeon and a dulcimer playing, but the council had decided, as it says, the authorities in charge of the letting are plebeian in their tastes, but they bar the melodeon, dulcimer, Jew's harp, mouth harmonium, or a combination of hair comb and newspaper. Interestingly enough, the following year there was an election in Motherwell, and one of the candidates, Mr. Grant, was asked if he would be in favour of melodeon and dulcimer accompaniment at dances in the town hall, and Mr. Grant said, "Certainly, yes. Many a time I have had sore feet dancing to melodeon. I favour that just as much as a string band." Needless to say, the dulcimer was allowed again because, again, Motherwell, that area, there are numerous references to dulcimer, and dulcimer and melodeon became a very popular combination for dances, for weddings, for any public occasion, really. Moving on to the next one, I'm into the 20s now, 1920s. 1924, BBC Radio Glasgow started broadcasting dulcimer music. And it's hard to imagine now how popular it was, really. William McNally, who we've already discussed, was broadcasting, and these programmes went on into the 1940s. In fact, probably beyond that. And the second one, W.F. Cornelius, was also broadcasting on the BBC at that time. In actual fact, going forward through the records, W.F. Cornelius broadcast a lot more than anybody else. His name comes up all the time. And also he played in Edinburgh, Aberdeen, all over Scotland. His name, from now on until the 1940s, his name comes up all the time. But I've been unable to find out anything about him whatsoever, other than that he was kept busy. Another one, Bellshill, which again is Lanarkshire. But the interest in this one was, again, it's William McNally. But it said he played over several Scottish songs and accompanied them with fine imitation of the bagpipes. How do you do an impersonation of the bagpipes on the dulcimer? I don't understand at all, but I've seen that reference to quite a few different dulcimer players where they've said they did an imitation of the bagpipes. I know there was one that I knew that I was told about, and he played, it was like a pipe band in the distance, and they came closer and then passed by. And I had assumed that they were impersonating maybe the drumming style of the pipe band drummers or something. But to say that it was a fine imitation of the bagpipes, I haven't a clue what that means. 1930, this one, James Redpath, he was still playing up in the 1960s, and he's the father of Jean Redpath, who was a very well-known folk singer. Don't know if people have heard of her, but the School of Scottish Studies have recordings of James Redpath, and I'm linked to one just now, which is James playing and Jean Redpath singing, and I'm sure you'll recognise the song.
Come along, let us foot it out together. Come along, be it fair or stormy weather, with the hills of home before us and the purple road ahead. Let us sing in happy chorus. Come along, come along. 'Tis the call of sea and shore, 'tis the smell of bog and peat, 'tis the scent of briar and myrtle that puts magic in our feet. For it's on we go rejoicing over brag and over stile. Soon we will be tramping out the last long mile. Come along, let us foot it out together. Come along, be it fair or stormy weather, with the hills of home before us and the purple road ahead. With a singing happy chorus, come along, come along.
Yeah, so it was interesting to find that there are recordings in the School of Scottish Studies with James Redpath playing. The next one I'm going to go into is through in Fife as well, where James Redpath was. This time it's Jimmy Scott, Scotland's premier dulcimer player and BBC broadcaster. And from this period on, Jimmy Scott does become the main man for BBC broadcasting and for variety concerts, played with people like the Alexander Brothers. I've got a wee bit, I'll play some music and give you a chance to read the page. The style that Jimmy Scott is playing in was pretty much the style that some of the people that came to the People's Palace in Glasgow, Willie Burke and a few other people, played in very similar style to that. The next one, the Douglas Water Dance Band, is a photograph of the 1940s. Douglas Water is a village in South Lanarkshire. And again, it's an example of the type of band that would be playing at a lot of dances and weddings with accordions and dulcimer. All the archives that I've gone through refer to solo dulcimers, and at these events they will also say that a band provided music for dance, and there's every possibility that there were dulcimers in the bands as well, but they don't specify the lineup for the band or the names of the musicians or anything. So I thought this was quite an important record because I haven't seen any other photograph of a band with a dulcimer in that period. This one is just an example of how the instances of the dulcimer being mentioned in the newspaper archive increased over the 1800s and the 1900s. And I suppose we should be careful in that this is only the newspaper archives, and there would have been a lot of players who never appeared in newspapers. There would have been a lot of players who only played at home for their own entertainment, and there would have been other players who played at local events that weren't reported in the papers. But you can see from 1900 to 1949, there was 3,411. And then 1950 to 59, it dropped to 323. I don't believe for a minute that all these dulcimer players had stopped playing or that they'd stopped having these events. I think a lot of the reason for that is a change in the newspapers. Maybe some of the local newspapers went out of business. Maybe the bigger papers were covering a bigger area and stuck to more mainstream news and didn't have to include articles about, church soirees and things like that. Also, a lot of the newspapers from that period to now haven't been included on the archive yet either, so there could be more to come. So the last slide I'm going to use on this part, something's happened here. Jimmy Cooper, and started a bit too soon there. Jimmy Cooper was a big influence on me starting to play the dulcimer because he was the first dulcimer player I ever heard. And I'll play the track now and give you a chance to read the page.